And a lot of times if you're just out venturing the country out there, you end up 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles away from where you were tenting the night before. You're not going to want to turn around and backtrack that whole area. You're going to want to set up a new tent, sleep the night, and then get back up. And for sure, the tent to me in that situation it's incredibly beneficial because you can just quickly throw it up, get up in the morning in the dark, get it back down, and get back on your back and get going.
No argument there. However, for you folks listening, Patrick moves around too much when he hunts.
It's a hiking and hunting experience.
Don't necessarily be like, oh yeah, I shouldn't try and hunt the same spot 2 days in a row. Like, well, maybe you should.
Are you calling him impatient?
I'm a butterfly, James. You got to let me move.
Patrick will just stomp through the woods and be like, nothing's here. These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer. SIG is a leading provider and manufacturer of firearms, electro-optics, ammunition, air guns, and suppressors. For over 250 years, Sig Sauer Inc. has evolved and thrived by blending American ingenuity, German engineering, and Swiss precision. Today, Sig Sauer is synonymous with industry-leading quality and innovation, which has made it the brand of choice amongst the U.S. military, the global defense community, law enforcement, competitive shooters, hunters, and responsible citizens. Sig Sauer is also a premier provider of elite firearms instruction and tactical training at the Sig Sauer Academy located in New Hampshire. For more information about Sig Sauer and its complete line of products, visit sigsauer.com. Gentlemen, thank you very much for that tour this morning. We're in the headquarters of NEMO Equipment. Are we still in New Hampshire? I feel like we're in New Hampshire. It feels like we're in a place where you can cross state lines really easily not realize that you've done it.
Yeah. You could just about throw a stone to Maine from here.
Yeah. Okay, so we're a stone's throw from Maine. We're in New Hampshire. We're in NEMO. What is NEMO? Who are you?
NEMO is a designer manufacturer of high-end outdoor gear.
Okay. Who are you?
I am Cam Brensinger. I'm the founder and CEO of NEMO.
I'm Randy Gaetano, and I'm a content creative director here at NEMO. Been here 3 years. Not comparable to Cam's 18 years
18
of being...
and a half now. Yep.
Yeah. This is Cam's baby.
Yep.
And we also have Patrick Hanley. Been out here at SIG headquarters this week in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and we're on our way up to Maine to do some muzzleloader hunting. And you guys are going to hear more about that in another episode. But we got this opportunity to come out and tour this facility, and it's so cool because I've used your guys' stuff, and to have that experience like in the mountains of Colorado and in a legitimately very trying environment, and then come out and kind of see where the concepts were born and everything that you're doing to test them here. It's amazing. It's really fun to have this opportunity to go through everything. It seems very evident that innovation is important to you. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so just as you were just saying that, James, about almost kind of pulling back the curtain, right, and seeing where gear comes from. I had that experience when I was in school. I went to school for product design, and I interned at Black Diamond Equipment, climbing equipment maker, back around 2000. And I remember the first time I got shown how to make a runner, which is basically just a webbing loop that we use in lead climbing, and just thinking like, wait, humans make this? Like it's not made by magical elves somewhere,
right?
And that was totally addicting to me. I mean, I've always loved making things. I've always loved outdoor adventure, and the notion that you could design and make things that would extend people's capability or that they'd really count on or use to go to amazing places and do great adventures. Like I had to do that.
Yeah. That's interesting that you can take something as simple as that and you can really track it back to, this giant organism, which is now. I think that there can be an issue with innovation today where people will create something that is not needed. It's a solution looking for a problem.
Yep.
How do you keep from falling into that trap?
Yeah, so back in that same time period when I was in school, the first time around in college, I studied physics and studio art and really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. My only plan for after college was going up to Denali with some friends. And when I came back from that, I realized I needed to pay bills and put a roof over my head, and started thinking seriously about a career, I sketched out a really crappy business plan, basically, and to start a gear company and kind of bootstrap it, out of climbing area parking lots kind of thing. And I showed it to my dad one day, who said, spared telling me what a lousy plan it was, basically, and said, you should check out industrial design. And when I saw what industrial or product design was, it was like manifest destiny. Like that's what I got to do with my life. So I go back to school. I had no design background, so I basically had to go back and redo undergrad. And I did that at Rhode Island School of Design. And when I was there and kind of learning industrial design, at some point I remember kind of realizing what I'm being taught to do right now is mass produce stuff. Like product design most of the time means, designing things for mass production. And I had, I was 20-something years old. I had some sensibility about taking care of the planet, and I had pretty mixed feelings about that. And so right from the outset, before I even incorporated the business, I thought, if I'm going to quote mass produce things, everything we bring to market has to be worthy. It has to be justified. And so a golden rule of NEMO has always been, we will not bring anything to market that's the same as what's out there. Everything we bring to market has to improve the experience of adventure.
And one of the things that we looked at was a chair, and what you brought up is that people have been sitting down on things for quite a long time. So if you're going to take on a project like that, like how can I change the chair?
Yeah.
Holy crap, that's a huge thing. A lot of people have thought about this. A lot of people have experienced chairs in all forms. And that takes a boldness to even think about taking it on.
Yeah. Yeah, and is it boldness or is it naivete? I don't know, but yeah, we said back in 2012 we want to make a cool chair. And like you said, we said, well, like everything else we do, it's going to have to be substantially different. It's going to have to really improve the experience. So the first thing we did was a little research project, kind of looking back over the history of chairs. I remember we'd hired a new designer to help with the project, and that was his first project, actually, was to kind of put together a slide deck on the history of the chair. And looking back to this, like, Egyptian stuff, that was pretty innovative, and realizing, wow, humankind's been making chairs for a long time. And when I was in design school, I learned too that making a chair is a favorite problem of designers. It's something humans have thought about a lot. So it was daunting. We were at the beginning, it was like, how the hell are we going to do anything different there? And at the time, hammocks were really hot. Different products going to go through cycles in our market, and hammocks were like on a major upswing. And so I think hammocks were in our subconscious. And so we had this idea to basically make almost like a hammock in a tiny frame the size of a chair, so make a swinging chair. And the notion was to make the experience a little more dynamic, like a little more fun. Like as you're sitting, you can move, and which felt natural. Like I think a lot of people move a little bit when they're sitting. So we had that thought in 2012. We did the first drawings in 2013, and it took us until 2018 to bring that to market. It was a long process.
That's cool. It's just an example, really, more than anything else. But it is
it's interesting to think about problems like that, stuff that people take for granted who are not in design, like myself. So I find it very interesting.
Well, I'll say too, James, I mean, that was humbling almost at every step along the way because, we started out making tents, then we make sleeping pads, then we make sleeping bags. Once we learned tents, a lot of those skills were transferable.
Mm-hmm.
But the chair was a new realm. I mean, it was like, a new supply chain, a new set of engineering problems. We had to get finite element analysis for our CAD modeling so we could, basically apply strain or stress rather to the chair frame and observe how the materials would strain and predict to some degree, the challenges that frame would undergo. So we had to get new tools. We had to set up the lab a certain way. We had to build test equipment, and it turns out supporting a hammock. There's a lot of forces in supporting a hammock, and building something strong enough to support a hammock in the form factor of a chair was strenuous. And it's the cool thing about that was it sort of showed us after that point. We were 12 years into the business, 10 years into the business, and it showed us. It sort of emboldened us to kind of be willing to continue to break out of, our experience and try new things, tackle new product categories.
And I love the testing of equipment because that's a lot of what I do, and I do it because I enjoy it. So seeing the machine that you guys built to, see how much these chairs could take before they collapsed is awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people have probably sat around a campfire at some point and either sat down into a chair that died at that point or tried to get up out of it and killed it in that means. So, the first thing that I asked when I see all this equipment that's obviously designed for killing this thing and seeing how much it takes to kill it, it's like, how much does it take to kill it?
Yeah.
And your answer was great because it wasn't something that I'd considered. So you have, a static load, like you gently place a, sober man into this chair who's still in control of his facilities. And then 5 hours later, after 27 bush lattes, down he goes with full force of gravity. That chair's going to have to be a little bit stronger at that point. So when you think about load ratings, you can't just be like, oh, it can hold a 300-pound, object. It's different than that. It's more complicated.
Yeah. Can it hold the 300-pound drunk object?
Yeah.
Different story.
Yeah. In 24 inches of free fall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it turns out that 24 inches produces a huge force. Like we've got a super nerd on our team, a Harvard PhD engineer, and I remember he and I were working through this in the beginning. Like, where are we going to set the load limit and what kind of safety factors are going to be? So like if you say, the chair's going to hold 300 pounds, does it literally just hold, like you put 301 pounds in and it breaks? No. I mean, you got to have some margin for error there. And so he's given me all this mathematical answer to it. And basically I said, look, what I need you to do is clear off this piece of testing equipment, put a chair on it, and I want to fall into it. Like I want to know, like I want to picture in my mind of, I weigh 225 pounds. If I stumble into this thing, like I want to know how much force that is. And then let's put a safety factor on that because I'm not the biggest guy who's going to sit in that thing. And my dynamic load at 225 pounds was twice my weight.
Right.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So from a hunter's perspective, if you're trying to buy a tent or a shelter, like you're not cool if you're not calling it a shelter these days, so we'll call it a shelter. If you're buying a shelter from the store and you're looking at your pad and your bag, your sleeping bag and your pillow and some of this furniture and other amenities that you have in camp, it can be really, really overwhelming if you're looking at a catalog or if you're looking at a website. Honestly, a lot of these tents look the same.
Yep.
To look at them in a picture, and like that's got to be a really difficult struggle for you in content, right? It's
Absolutely.
like to take a picture of this stuff and be like, look, it's different. When it sure enough is different, but how do you prove it in a photo?
I mean, I was just thinking about the chair as Cam was talking about it, like reinventing the sitting experience. And so I have to tell that story to people. How do you get them to watch a video long enough to see that this chair actually swings and it's a completely different experience? So,
knowing that people have a 3-second attention span.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same with tents.
Yeah, I'd say with tents, I mean, first of all, James, I want to cut you off, but I actually would say that people should want a tent and not a shelter. Because for us...
What's the difference?
Yeah, so for us in the field, we would say a shelter is not an enclosure. A tent is an enclosure.
Okay.
So, and I get it, why, say, 10 years ago, people would... Now, if bugs are not an issue, or rain is not an issue, or blowing snow is not an issue, whatever, maybe you don't need walls or even a floor. But, people would endure a lot more 10 years ago and be willing to suffer because carrying, say, just a tarp and a pad and a bag was substantially lighter than the lightest tents at the time. Now, our lightest backcountry tents are so light, there is no reason to not carry a, quote, tent and keep the elements out. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason to deliberately suffer because what you're trading off is getting rest, and like being rested the next day can be the difference between being successful or having a good day or not. So I'd say carry a tent, and the lightest tents now, I mean, eat 2 spoonfuls less for breakfast, and that's the difference between that and taking the walls and the floor away. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're just so light. I mean, you might as well carry a tent.
Okay. What about stoves? I mean, Western hunters, we love to have a fire in there.
Wood stove.
It's cold. So I've really been mostly floorless the last few years, and that's kind of the go-to for a lot of people out there.
But will you take that into the backcountry? Will you pack that 5-8 miles in?
Yeah, if that's the job, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially, if it's a cold hunt, if we're going to be in single digits, teens, 20s, you talk about that experience of like being able to get rest. One of the big struggles for me when I'm on a backcountry trip and it's cold is getting up on time in the morning. So if I have to get up an hour and a half before it's light, it is as cold as it's going to be. So what I tend to like to do is to build a fire the night before. I'll go to sleep cold. I'll wake up, light my fire, and then I can, wake up in a warm shelter and get dressed. But there is some problems with that. Like you've got a lot of extra gear that you're bringing with you and a lot of extra weight. And it's dirty, and it's a little bit dangerous. Like all of this other equipment that we can carry, it melts. So everything that we have can fail when it hits that hot stove. There's carbon monoxide issue. Like there's a lot of give and take with this stuff. So if I'm going to forsake that and go to an enclosed tent, how am I going to stay warm in that situation? Because people do a lot in way colder conditions than I hunt in.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, I would say, look, it's all of these things compromise something, right? And there's no perfect solution. And I've spent over 40 nights in a wall tent this year since COVID started. And the cold ones, we're running a wood stove, and that's great camping living.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love that. But in a backcountry situation, I guess because my roots are on the mountaineering side, where whether you could do that or not, like we just never even thought of bringing a wood stove. We didn't bring a wood stove to Denali. The way we address that there is the tents in the first place are pretty small. So when you wake up in the morning, the second you open that sleeping bag, you're actually warming that air volume pretty fast. And, during the night, you're in a super warm, I mean, I guess the sort of 3 zones to consider would be, when you're hanging out in the tent in the evening, and you're passing a little time in the evening and you're trying to dry your stuff off maybe and you're, having a conversation with your buddy or whatever. And then the sleeping part, and then the morning when you're getting geared up. As far as the kind of in the evening part, it's, if you got one or two people in a small tent like that and you're kind of down to your long underwear, you're warming that little, like our little Tenchi or Chigori mountaineering tents, or any mountaineering tent in that category, they're small enough you're going to warm that up. Then you get into your -20, -40 sleeping bag, and you're trapping all that heat inside, so the tent is going to be ambient air temperature. And there's a little bit of a mythology that different tents will warm different. In the middle of the night, like your heat is trapped by that bag. It's in that bag. Right. I don't care what the tent is made out of. It's going to be ambient air temperature. In the morning when you wake up, it's back to, first of all, from mountaineering days, I put all my gear, all my clothes in my bag with me, which kind of sucks, honestly, for the first hour. But you do this sort of bellowing technique where, you open up the bag a little bit, you bellow your bag, and you'll boil that moisture off. And so by morning, I'm waking up, all my gear is warm, it's all dry. I'll put as much of it on as I can while I'm still in the bag. And then the second I crack my bag open, 5 minutes later, it's reasonable. Not only am I already partly dressed, but it's reasonably warm in the tent.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a really interesting thing. And honestly, the same thing with wall tents. Like you can have a 12-ounce canvas wall tent with a 12-ounce tarp over the top of it, and you can have a stove that's glowing like a cherry. And I always say that the tent is the same temperature as the stove. And as soon as that fire goes out, it gets cold. I mean, there's not an R value in canvas. There just really isn't. That's not the way it works.
Well, so that's a perfect point. And so if I kind of equate the two, and I'm thinking again about all these nights. I mean, this last weekend, I spent a couple nights in our wall tent with a wood stove. And you fire up the wood stove when you're hanging out in the evening. It burns down in the middle of the night, and it turns to ambient temperature, and then you crack it back. You get it back going in the morning. Again, the difference is that, like, our wall tent is 12 by 17. There's no, and we got my two kids and my wife and I, that's not enough body heat to warm that up.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we get up in the morning. It's not going to be a warm tent unless that wood stove is going. But if we're in a 2-man mountaineering tent and my wife and I sit up in long underwear, in minutes, it'll be warm.
Yep.
We found that in Alaska too. Me and Daniel spent a lot of time in the endurance out there, and in the morning time, exactly what he said. Like, you'd get up in the morning and it would feel that chill, and you could kind of feel it for a little bit. As soon as you wake up and you start moving around, and we'd start making breakfast and everything, it would immediately warm the inside of the tent up.
Yeah.
It was interesting though, and actually, I think everybody would find interest in this, and you're the guy I need to ask about it. And James will want to know the answer to this too. So I don't know if you guys have like a standard as far as tent sizing go, but can you explain to us, like, when you say 2-person tent, so like the endurance is a 2-person tent, and I call it my little hotel because I have so much room in there when I go by myself that I will carry that weight just because I like having the extra space, and if somebody else needs to crash with me, they can jump in there. Yeah. How is there actually a standard when they determine, based on the amount of seasons the tent is worthy for, how big a 2-person is in a 4-season as compared to how big it is in a 2-season tent?
It's not a protocol or a formal testing standard, but the industry standard is to use our sleeping pads. Like, over the years, our pad sizes have become standardized across brands. So we basically all make 20-inch, 25-inch, and 30-inch pads. So we say, we use the 20-inch pad. 20 by 72 is like, that's the footprint of a person. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's up to us. So, in a mountaineering tent, typically we'll give you more room because we recognize that you're going to have a lot more gear. So that's why it feels more palace-like, because there's room in there, knowing that you got a lot of extra clothing with you and stuff.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the same concept applies to bags that Cam is talking about for tents, where a slimmer bag is going to be more thermally efficient because you're not warming as much air up.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Rainey, because that comes with the same kind of compromise, right? It's like the mummy bag, it's going to keep you warmer. You're going to warm it up right away. You're going to keep it warm with fewer calories during the night, but you're also not going to spread out in a running position. Mm-hmm. So the wall tent is like that. Like, you can stand up in the wall tent. You can walk around. You can hang up your gear to dry. You can have a wood stove, but But the trade-off is you need a lot of heat to warm that thing up. And at a little mountaineering tent, your own body heat can warm that.
The other thing you brought up, James, that I noticed when I go out west is as far as having like a teepee stove style is that's something that I see a lot of people use when they have a stationary area that they're hunting from. A lot of the times, like when me and born and raised, when we were in Colorado, a lot of days you were doing camp on your back. You'd wake up in the morning, you're going to pack up, put everything back in your pack, and you're going to walk with camp on your back all day and then pick a spot that night. And that's where I saw the benefit to the tent, without a doubt, back there. Is that we never stayed in some of those days, we never stayed in the same spot 2 times. And a lot of times, if you're just out venturing the country out there, you end up 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles away from where you were tenting the night before. You're not going to want to turn around and backtrack that whole area. You're going to want to set up a new tent, sleep the night, and then get back up. And for sure, the tent to me in that situation it's incredibly beneficial, because you can just quickly throw it up, get up in the morning in the dark, get it back down, and get back on your back and get going.
No argument there. However, for you folks listening, Patrick moves around too much when he hunts.
It's a hiking and hunting experience.
Don't necessarily be like, oh yeah, I shouldn't try and hunt the same spot 2 days in a row. Like, well, maybe you should.
Are you calling him impatient?
I'm a butterfly, James. You got to let me move.
Patrick will just stomp through the woods and be like, nothing's here.
James uses these binocular things and all this weird stuff.
You like to see it firsthand.
Yeah, you just got to keep going.
Eventually, he just finds this elk with its tongue hanging out. It's like, shoot me.
I'm tired.
Yeah. He's tired of running from you. And then he, sets up his tent and is happily right there next to his dead elk. So. Temperature ratings on sleeping bags. I have not quite so humorously joked that I feel like the temperature rating on a bag is a temperature at which you die. How do we actually come up with that number? Because if you're in a 20-degree bag on a 20-degree night, you're probably not super happy.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's actually, with the current bag standard, they're tested with a heated mannequin. So there's a formal protocol for how the bag is tested in a lab, and they come out with 3 ratings: a T comfort, a T limit, and a T extreme. And basically, the temperature comfort is the temperature rating at which the average person, male, female, whatever your kind of physiology is, you're going to be good to go. You're going to be comfortable. T limit is the temperature at which a average female physiology will be comfortable. And T extreme is beyond that, anyone's going to die.
Yep.
Like that's sort of what you described. So
which number are you using?
So typically we use for women's bags, and we're starting to move away from genders for bags, because there's really not a lot of good reason for that. You've got people of different physiologies despite genders,
sure,
and people of different heights despite genders. But typically in the industry, women's bags are warmer. They're about 15 degrees on average warmer than a men's bag.
Maybe I need to look into those.
Well, the other thing is it's up to, so everyone who's publishing a temperature should be following the standard, but it's also up to the brand's discretion, kind of where they draw the line. Like if the test result comes back and says, this bag is warm to 29 degrees, do you call that a 29-degree bag? Do you call that a 30-degree bag? Do you call that a 32-degree bag? Do you call that a 40-degree bag? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And we learned in our early history with bags to just sandbag them. You're better off to have a happy customer.
Right.
We'd thread the needle. Like if we got a 30-degree test, that might be a freezing bag. A 32-degree bag, we call it. Now we give a few degrees. And the trade-off is you give up, your bag's going to be a little bit heavier when it comes to spec comparison, and we give up a little margin, but because physiology varies,
Sure.
right? And, what works for you may be different than me or the next guy. And so we give a little bit of margin there. And most good bag brands will do that.
Yeah. Okay. So which number do you use?
It depends on whether it's men's or women. And like I said, we're actually kind of moving away from doing that and actually just publishing, disclosing like what the comfort level is.
Okay.
Instead of calling it a women's bag and it just is 15 degrees warmer, like, here's the spread of kind of where that, and then you pick.
Gotcha.
That's the direction.
Choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
Are you comfort, are you limit, or are you extreme?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you kind of know. Well,
I'm
sleep cold.
comfort. Just so you know, if I call you and be like, "What bag do I need?" It's like,
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. Like my wife and I are exactly that. So she's cold when it's less than 80 degrees out.
Right.
Until she's sound asleep. And then something switches in her brain and her physiology like turns on and she goes to 1,000,000 degrees and she throws all the covers off. And in the middle of the night, I'm exactly the opposite. My physiology like goes into torpor. Like I'm like a hibernating bear and I need every cover on the bed. So it just, it depends, everybody's different that way.
yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a good relationship worked out there.
Yes.
Does the exterior materials of the bag have an impact, or is it merely just the fill? In other words, can you create a material internally and externally that retains heat better, that raises that temperature rating, or are you guys relying on the fill mostly?
It's really air that produces insulation, so what you really want for the most part is loft. Now it depends a lot on the nature of the insulation. I mean, the down feather is still unmatched by any human technology in terms of, like, if you look at that thing under a microscope, it's like a little fractal. It just gets like these little tiny fibers, and then you look the next level and there's more little tiny fibers. And it's just this crazy little structure.
All holding air.
Yeah, it just traps a lot of ambient air around it. And especially, fill power for bags is basically the amount of air volume that little downy feather will fill. So the higher the fill power, the more voluminous, the more air that little feather occupies. So especially with, call it a 700 and above fill power down, it's just, there's nothing quite that good at being insulating. What it's doing, again, is just sort of locking air molecules around it. And that's the best insulator. So the fabric contributes something, but very little. Okay. Now, in our sleeping pads, we use a reflective film that bounces radiant heat back. And that still counts on some airspace in front of it. It's not like if you put that space blankety Mylar film right against your body, it's actually a conductor. But if you put it at a little bit of a distance away, it'll bounce radiant heat back. So it is possible to use thin films to do some insulating, but in a bag, it's not really practical to do that because one of the other considerations is you want it to breathe a lot, especially if it's a down bag. But you don't want to be trapping a whole lot of moisture inside that system. And sort of back to what we were talking about before, especially in the case of if you're backcountry hunting and you're in a shoulder season and you're very likely wet. It's very likely a wet environment one way or another. If you're bringing that wet clothes into your bag to dry it off in the night, the last thing you want to do is have that be a big vapor barrier. You want to boil that moisture out of the bag during the night and wake up, with everything nice and dry. So in addition to trying to make air volume, we're also trying to make sleeping bags breathable.
Okay.
I want to talk about sleeping pads. I feel like that's something that folks gloss over. They'll spend $350, $400 on a sleeping bag, and then they get a pad as an afterthought. But to me, it's a very important part of the equation.
Yeah, so pads, it's a really good point. And actually, I think there are a lot of unhappy. There are a good number of unhappy sleepers out there who think that their bag is to blame, and the reality is it's their pad. Because when you're, I think the best way to think about kind of that sleep system is sort of an envelope. And when you lay on the sleeping bag, you're crushing all the air out of it. And we were just saying, like, air is really the insulator. So the part of the bag that you're laying on is not doing you a whole lot of good. So if you think of it as sort of the 360 envelope around you, that part that's crushed down in your bag, it's useless. It needs the pad. And furthermore, the pad had better be just as insulating as the rest of that envelope. So you got to have a pad that matches your bag.
Or maybe even more so because you're in contact with the ground, right?
Yeah, truly. I mean, especially again in a typical fall hunting environment, that ground's probably pretty cold, for sure. And if you're in a small tent and you've limited convection, you don't have a lot of wind passing through, you don't have a lot of convective cooling, you're right, the ground may be an even bigger heat sink, And there's a lot of, so with pads, it's sort of the same but different strategy for how to create insulation. But there have been some brands like Xped years ago put down into pads, which was a brilliant innovation at the time and kind of unlocked, after years of the Thermarest self-inflating pad being really the only option for us in the backcountry, Xped's down pads really unlocked, a new era of innovation. And when we came into the space, the race was really, how do you make those higher R values, say a 3 or a 4 or a 5 R value, at the least possible weight and pack size? And the way we're able to do that is basically by making a honeycomb of cells inside and using reflective membranes, which we were talking about before. And also sometimes we use, we call it white fuzz, like a non-woven filament insulation, synthetic insulation inside. But at the same time, unlike the bag, you've got to not only be insulating, but you've got to create an air volume. You have to make a comfortable thing to sleep on. So they look like nothing. I mean, we joke about it all the time here. It's like just this boring looking slab. But it's been tricky development over the years, making a really great pad.
And I don't think that's obviously with sleeping bags, there's not one bag for every occasion. There's not one pad for every occasion either. If you're going to go on a river trip, you're going to want a different pad than if you're going to go, out on some freaking rock face somewhere, and that's going to be different than if you're going on a hunting trip. Yeah. If your pad is inflatable, folks, you need to bring the repair kit with you, because inflatable means that it can also be unintentionally deflatable. Doesn't matter who makes it, and it can absolutely ruin your ability to sleep. And pretty much no matter what, if you're hunting, if you're camping, a third of your life you're going to spend sleeping. Yep. And that's why we're talking about this stuff. So,
well, James, you hit on a couple of great things there too. I mean, the thing about backcountry hunting, right, is you're very likely not in a groomed gravel parking spot. So I mean, you might be out in thorns and rocks and twigs, and there's a lot of stuff there to puncture. So, what I usually do and what I'd recommend, and kind of back from my mountaineering days, is also carry a closed cell pad. In any real cold environment, we bring both. And we for us, we have a Z folding closed cell foam pad we call Switchback. I'll bring that with an air pad, and the idea is, that Switchback closed cell foam pad is super robust. I mean, it's really resilient material. It's gonna protect you no matter what. But the air pad, so it's sort of there as your security layer, and then the air pad is there for your additional insulation and comfort.
Right.
The air pad gives you the plushness, and the Switchback is your insurance policy.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And the Z pads they're light.
They're light. They're inexpensive.
Yeah, it's no big deal. Yeah, it's
and makes a great seat. When you're
totally.
If you're spot and stalking, or just hanging out eating lunch or whatever it is. I mean, it's just handy having those along.
It's got lots of uses.
Yeah, yeah. You can make a improvised splint out of it, or any number of things.
Yeah, totally. You can keep stuff warm that needs to stay warm. You can keep stuff cold that needs to stay cold. If you're talking about food. If you're hot weather hunting, folks, and you need to keep some meat cold, first thing in the morning when you get out of your sleeping bag, completely unzip it and let that heat out of it, and then wrap your meat up in your sleeping bag, and it'll keep it cold all day. And then at night, you you're going to smell like meat, but your meat's not going to waste. So there's lots of ways to use this stuff, and whenever you are living off what you can carry, everything that you're carrying should have multiple uses. And it's not that you're trying to invent other ways to use this stuff. It's that you need things that can be used for multiple things. Since we've talked about bags a lot, but let's talk a little bit about blankets. When and where, why?
Yeah, so we make some blankets, and mostly, not for expeditionary kind of use, but for travel and hanging out on the couch, and it's one of a few items we make that's good for just holiday gifts and things like that. It's meant to be an accessible price point. But I'm heading up north this weekend to deer hunt for a few days, and I actually contemplated. I have a First Light. We have a partnership with First Light, and we make some product with their pattern. And I'm still on the fence about maybe bringing that stuff in that puffin blanket into my pack, because I know I'm going to end up sitting, for a couple hours. It's supposed to be kind of wet snow, bordering on snow for the weekend. Could be pretty nice to be wrapped up in that blanket, sitting by the tree for a few hours. So it's mostly a leisure and fun product. But I keep one in my truck also. I mean, here if
that's an important thing to keep in a vehicle of any kind.
Yeah, I mean, you slide off the road here in a nor'easter, and it could be quite a while before you're getting attention.
Or if you come up on somebody else who's hurt, like a blanket is an absolutely life-saving tool. And if somebody's looking at shock, you need to get them warm and keep them warm. So it's just a great thing to have with you, and doesn't take up a lot of space. You're going to use it for other stuff.
Yep.
Keep it in your rig. Pillows. Backcountry pillows. Near and dear to my heart. Big guy, I've got wide shoulders, like to sleep on my side, and, I'm not notoriously flexible, so my ear doesn't necessarily touch my shoulder, though it tries to at night, unless I have a frickin' pillow. So this is an important thing to bring. They don't weigh that much. Talk to me about backcountry pillows.
Yeah. Such an underrated thing. And I think sometimes people stop themselves from enjoying that luxury because of a little bit of pride. Like, I don't need a pillow. But man, I mean, for me, once you cover the basics, there's few things that impact a good night's sleep more for me than a pillow. And I totally agree about just the height of a pillow. In fact, when we launched our pillow many years ago, we did it with a grid of shock cord on the back of it, which we ended up taking off because nobody understood it. But the purpose of it was so you could take an extra. Actually, I think we still have it in the luxury.
There's one, yeah.
Yeah, we still make one with it. But the purpose was so you could take an extra piece of clothes and pull it through that lace of shock cord on the back to get that extra height.
Yeah.
Because like for me, I'm not as wide shouldered as you are, but if my head is not like in line with my spine, I'll wake up in a couple hours and my shoulder will hurt, or like I'm just not comfortable. And
especially for side sleepers.
Yeah, and I'm like religiously a running position sleeper.
Same.
So yeah, I think it's a big deal, and it's pillow is another one of those things. I mean, it's sort of like the sleeping pad. I mean, you can look at it and think it's just there's nothing to it, but there's some constraints on making a good backcountry pillow. I mean, it's got to pack small. It's got to have enough height. It can't be like a football when your head is on it and your head's bobbleheading all night. Like, it's got to be stable. It's got to be insulating. It's got to be soft to the touch. And I think we've done a pretty good job of building those things in.
That's one of those things that for a while, like before I used one, I always, you look at your backpack every time you go out and you're trying to think of like, what am I using? What am I not using? Everybody's always trying to get weighed out, especially if you're spending a lot of time out there. And when you realize how tiny these things are and how effective they are and the lack of weight, it's almost like you're just saying to yourself, why am I not doing this? And then once you do it once, you're done. It's like a lot of things that I've seen is we have all these little luxuries that we take out with us, and sometimes you go, I don't need that. And then the first time that you do it and you experience it, you realize, boy, I did this for years. I hiked for years and never took a trekking pole with me. I'd go out
Crazy.
and carry. Oh yeah, and it was
Do your knees still work?
sometimes, but it was one of those things that I was always like, oh, I don't need those. I'm young. I don't need stuff like that. I don't have to carry the extra weight with me. And then the first time I used them, I said, I just lost 10 years of my life not using trekking poles because I was just too stubborn to try it. And now I won't go anywhere without them. And that's the same thing I think of with the pillow. Is like a lot of people, like you said, will just say that's not something I'm going to spare the weight. There is no weight.
Yeah.
There is no size in the pack. And when you first put your head on it, you're like, this is a decision I'm glad that I made.
Yeah.
Worth it.
Yeah, I think back to my first long backpacking trip was when I was a senior in high school. I convinced my high school to let me do a independent senior project to take a month in March and April to hike sections of the AT here, like through the Mahoosics and the Presidentials and the Franconia Ridge area and stuff. And I remember I weighed my pack at the beginning of that trip, and it was 86 pounds. Ooh. And now, like, that's laughable. Like, like you have to be insane to. There's no reason. There's no good reason why you would, hit the trailhead with 86 pounds. I mean, unless maybe you're working for the AMC and you're like shuttling peanut butter up to the lodge or whatever. But I don't, and to some degree, there's been this race over the years since, over the 30 years since then, to just get it lighter and lighter and lighter, and like, sawing the handles off things and cutting the straps off things, and like down to a level that to me is past rationality. Like I can carry 30, 40 pounds, and it's not gonna, the difference between 40 and 30 pounds is not gonna change how far I get in the day. But it may completely change how much I enjoy my meal or how well I sleep at night or what, you know what I mean? It's like when you're down to a few ounces, particularly if it's a few ounces like a pillow that may truly transform how you sleep at night, like I say, it's worth it.
It's interesting you say that from a comfort perspective, like James brought up with the sleeping bag, and the way that I am with a tent is the world has become down to this technology is minimalist. Like this, if I can get my pack to 10 pounds and I can survive in the wilderness, I have the best setup ever. Where in fact, like the more I would try to lose some of that weight, the more you start to realize like, hey, those extra couple pounds make me refreshed in the morning. They make me feel better. They just, like I was telling Randy, I've carried that endurance tent pretty much everywhere since I started using it.
Yep.
And it's going to add 3 or 4 pounds to the Kodiak I was carrying last year. But as I used it more and more, I was like, it was a sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's like somebody saying, I sleep really, really hot, so I bring a 30-degree bag almost everywhere. I very rarely use anything on that. But if you're James and you're saying you get cold in the night, that 0-degree bag is going to weigh carry an extra pound with you, but it's worth it because you're going to sleep. And I started. It took a long time to realize that, but I think you bring that up. It is critically important that I think we all get our brains wrapped around technology is the smallest weight completely possible, but comfort is something that you're going to wish you had when you get out there and you realize that extra 2 pounds would have made you happier.
Yeah, I think it's like whether you're looking at one element, trying to win on one element of the whole experience, or looking at the whole experience. So like if it's just about who has the lightest pack, well, that's a no-brainer. But if it's like a holistic view of wanting it to be a great experience, wanting it to be a successful trip, like wanting to thrive on that adventure, you may do that math a little bit differently. Mm-hmm.
One thing I will say is, if you're planning on killing something and packing it out, you need to be really light when you go in. If you're going to go hunt with llamas and there's no chance that you're going to kill anything, whatever, bring the luxuries. But that difference between carrying a 100-pound pack and carrying a 110-pound pack is often the difference between injury or not.
Yeah.
So if you can be light on the front end, if you're going to go in there with the right mindset and skill and attitude, being light up front is important. And that's why, this lighter gear, it requires more technology. It requires it's more expensive, and it's not like you're getting ripped off. Like it costs more to make. It costs more to design. Like you have to put on your big brain if you're going to take something and make it lighter and have it do the same job as something that's heavier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I'm thinking of I went out to Idaho to hunt with our friends at First Lights last fall, right?
Two
falls
falls ago.
2 falls ago already. And on their recommendation, I bought a EXO pack with a carbon frame, and
Great pack.
great pack. I mean,
Excellent
I've
pack,
loved that
yeah.
pack since. It's really light. It's expensive,
Yep.
but that's a case where, there's no good I mean, if you can afford that pack, there's no reason to carry your weight in a steel frame versus that lightweight carbon. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But I think there's a reason to carry a pack with a frame in it versus a limp sack. You know what I mean? And so I think it's sort of like the pillow is sort of like that. Like, and maybe some people do. I mean, if you don't need a pillow to be comfortable, like I wish I could sleep on my back. I wish I could sleep on my back in a mummy position. Right, because
Wouldn't
I
that be
carry
nice?
this like super tight, like low volume bag and no pillow, and I'd be good to go. But I can't sleep like that.
No, I'm amazed at people who can in some of these little tiny bags. I just want to shoot myself and become the mummy. It's like, let me out. I can't, my shoulders are all like hot dogged in. It's terrible. It's a horrible experience. But some people do it. They must, because lots of companies sell little tiny sleeping bags.
Yeah.
I don't know. I need to be able to wiggle around a little bit. Got to move. But, okay. So the last thing that I want to ask you about when we're talking about luxuries, I will call this a luxury item, although I will say that if you're going to be in a camp for greater than 5 days, you should really seriously consider this item, and that is a shower.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hygiene keeps you in the game. It's not just like, oh, I need a shower. It's like, no, you need to keep your body clean so that it continues to function, because you've been wearing the same stuff and you're going to start growing bacterial cultures on your skin. So don't be nasty.
Yeah.
But showers, like, it doesn't necessarily have to weigh 1,000 pounds and require propane or whatever. Like, you have a pretty elegant solution to that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean it's one of those happy accident things. I was actually on an overland trip on the Baja Peninsula years ago with some other couples, and one of the couples were, let's say, more city folk, and after a few days, I could see. I mean, we loaned a lot of people on the trip, including these guys, some of our kind of backcountry gear, and I could see that they were just not loving climbing in and out of this little backpacking tent and desperate to take a shower and whatever. So I had this thought, like, what if we made, this like Uber 2-person tent, that was standing height. I mean, in the case of overland, you care what things weigh, but not like we do,
right?
Being human powered in the backcountry. And so what if it were standing height and it even maybe had a shower room, and then and that shower room had like a retractable floor, and it had maybe like a place to hang a shower inside. So we started designing this thing, and I think we called it the Safari tent at the time. And it was fixing to weigh, 15 pounds and cost $1,000, and was fated from the beginning to be a dead end. But it got us thinking about a shower. Like, we're looking at the showers that are on the market and realizing that pretty much all the camp showers, the stuff that you'd actually kind of carry out into the woods anyway, were these hanging, like heated up in the sun, hanging up in a tree somewhere. And so we got some of these things and we're playing with them, and you didn't get a lot of water pressure out of it, and water's heavy. I mean, it's 8 pounds a gallon, right? So it becomes, and then designing a tent strong enough to hold one of these things up high enough that you'd get any water, it just wasn't working.
Right.
So we had this thought one day, is there any reason why, like, we were already making tents with inflated ribs in them, air beams we called them, instead of traditional tent poles. So we already knew a little bit about making things airtight and making pumps and stuff. So I thought, is there any reason why you can't take an empty 2-liter Coke bottle, fill it with water, and repressurize it with like a little hand pump or a foot pump, and squirt water out of it and clean yourself with that? And that's literally, we made this kludgy little prototype in the shop with exactly that. And with a foot pump from one of our tents at the time, we could make enough water pressure. It was just like, wow, this is cool. And we ended up taking that to market, and the tent never went anywhere. So it really was a happy accident out of the tent exploration. And it's, it packs up small. It's simple. It's resilient. The pump has, we were talking about this a little bit in our conversation before the podcast, but it has a return spring in it, but it's not metal. It's actually stadium cushion foam. So there's no parts to it to break or anything, and it creates good water pressure.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I lived in a wall tent for several months one year, going from winter and into spring and summer. And I eventually got a shower, and it was such a game changer. It was such a game changer to be able to get in my rack and be clean at night.
Totally.
Yeah, and that was not a normal situation, right? I wasn't hunting; I was working. But being able to do that is huge, and being able to do that with a really light, small system that's effective and actually has enough pressure to not just clean yourself, but to clean other things.
Totally.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, we also make a shelter. I mean, there's a lot of potty shelters or shower shelters out there, but we do make a shelter that goes with it that has a little towel rack and toilet paper dispenser and things like that, and together
Draining floor.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's and I find some of us are more sensitive than others. If I want to get my whole family, let's say, to go out and enjoy camping night after night, that can be a pretty key piece.
How do people find out more about NEMO?
You can go to our website. It's nemoequipment.com.
Call Randy.
Yeah, you can call me. My number's on my email. We have a YouTube channel as well. It has all of our products. It has some how-tos and some brand videos. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and our blog. We have a great blog that has a lot of adventure stories and tips and tricks, lots of different information. Cool.
And your First Light collaboration is on First Light's website too, correct?
As well,
yeah. A lot of that stuff on there. Yep.
We have a full page on our site, and they do as well. That's the only two places that you can get the field collection.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Good luck on your hunt this weekend in Maine.
We're going to culturize James differently. He cultured us to the west. Now it's time to teach him about the east.
Hang out in
the
thick, dense woods.
You've eaten lobster.
Leave the binos in the truck.
You've drove through Boston. You've eaten lobster. The only
Change the
missing
scope
link
to a 4-power.
Yeah, the only missing link is wearing a flannel jacket and hiking through the woods now.
Yeah.
And then you're a New Englander.
And you're going to hang out with Hal.
Yeah.
That should be interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited.
That's
I
very
read
cool.
his book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He's a legend.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you guys in your upcoming hunts. I know both of you have been in the woods a little bit and have more to come. So
Absolutely.
get it done.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. This episode was edited by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Artwork for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatterlin and digitized by Celia Christofferson. If you enjoyed the show, I encourage you to share it with a friend and subscribe. You can find photos and more content on Instagram at Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.